The war had ended, though the scars of battle still marked the land and the stars above. Smoke drifted from broken towers and the smell of burned metal still lingered in the air. Both sides, human and alien, had lost much, but peace had been won at a heavy cost. It was inside the grand throne hall of the alien king that the true test of peace began. Daniel, a human soldier, stood alone before the king's golden seat. He was not dressed in shining armor anymore. His uniform was torn, dirt covered his boots, and scars lined his arms. But he stood tall, his gaze steady and unshaken. Around him, the alien nobles whispered to one another, their strange, scaled faces full of curiosity. They could not understand why the king had summoned a simple human into his court. The alien king, towering and broad, wore a crown shaped from molten crystal. His voice was deep and filled with pride as he spoke. "Human," he began, "your actions in the war have reached my ears. When my warriors were surrounded, you did not abandon them. When my people were caught in the fire of your kind's machines, you shielded them. And when my own son lay wounded on the battlefield, it was your hands that carried him to safety." Gasps filled the hall. Few had known these details. Many aliens had believed humans were only savages who cared for their own kind, but here stood one who had acted with honor. The king leaned forward, his crystal crown shining under the torchlight. "For this, I offer you reward. Name what you desire: gold, land, ships, or a title of nobility among my people. Whatever you choose, it will be yours." The court fell silent, waiting for the human's answer. They expected him to ask for treasure or power. Some whispered that he would request command of soldiers, or perhaps his own territory. Others thought he would demand weapons of alien craft, ones that could make his name legendary among his kind. But Daniel did not answer right away. He looked around the hall, at the banners of war hanging from the walls, at the alien guards with their sharp armor, at the nobles who judged him with cold eyes. Then his gaze rested on the king once more. His words came slowly but firmly. "I do not want gold. I do not want ships. I do not want land or power." The whispers grew louder, shocked by his refusal. The king raised a hand and silence returned. His voice rumbled. "Then what do you want, human?" Daniel took a deep breath. His voice was calm, yet strong enough to echo across the vast chamber. "I want your fiercest daughter." The hall froze. The nobles stared in disbelief. Some laughed, nervously, thinking it must be a strange human joke. Others hissed with outrage, their voices rising in anger. The alien king's eyes narrowed. He studied the human carefully. His fiercest daughter was not a jewel to be given away. She was Serath, a warrior whose name was spoken with both respect and fear. She had never been tamed, not by enemies, not even by her own father. She was known to break swords in training and challenge generals in combat. For years she had refused suitors who sought her hand, leaving them humiliated in front of crowds. And now, a human dared to ask for her. The king's laughter broke the silence. It was a booming, thunderous sound that shook the hall. "You are, bold human. Of all the treasures in my kingdom, you ask for what no one dares ask. My fiercest daughter?" He shook his head, smiling with disbelief. "Do you even know what you are asking for?" Daniel did not smile. His eyes held steady and his voice carried no doubt. "Yes, I know." The laughter of the king slowly faded. He saw that the human was not jesting. Around the hall, the nobles muttered angrily, calling the human arrogant. Some demanded his punishment for insulting the king, but the king raised his hand once more, silencing them all. "Bring her," he commanded. The massive doors at the end of the hall opened, and footsteps echoed on the stone floor. Serath entered the chamber. She wore dark armor, light yet strong, fitted to her form. A long blade rested across her back, and her eyes burned with fire like the edge of a storm. Her hair was braided tightly, and her steps carried the weight of confidence. She did not walk like a princess. She walked like a warrior. When she saw Daniel, her expression sharpened. She had heard the words already from the guards outside. A human had asked for her, as if she were some prize to be claimed. Rage simmered in her chest. She stopped beside her father's throne and crossed her arms. "This is the one?" she asked, her voice sharp, her eyes never leaving Daniel. "Yes," the king said with amusement. "This human has refused riches, refused power, and instead has asked for you." Her laughter was not like her father's. It was harsh, cutting like steel. "A fragile human dares to ask for me? Has he lost his mind?" She stepped forward, glaring at Daniel as if her gaze alone could crush him. "Tell me, human, why? Why do you not ask for gold like the rest of your kind? Why do you ask for something you cannot handle?" The hall leaned forward in silence, waiting for his answer. Daniel did not flinch. He met her fiery eyes with calm resolve. "Because gold fades, ships rust, land can be taken, power dies with time. But standing beside someone who cannot be broken, that is worth more than any treasure." The word struck the hall like a blade. Even the nobles stopped their whispers. Some stared in surprise, others frowned in disbelief. The king leaned back, stroking his chin, intrigued by the human's reasoning. Sarath, however, only narrowed her eyes further. She did not look impressed. "You speak like a poet," she said coldly, "but poets do not survive battle. Words do not prove strength." Daniel nodded. "Then test me." Her eyes widened for a brief second, then her lips curved into a dangerous smile. "Very well. If you want me, human, you must prove yourself. I will not be handed like a gift. You will face the trials of my people, survive them, and perhaps I will listen." The hall erupted in shouts and excitement. The alien nobles cheered at the thought of the human being tested. They believed he would fail, as many warriors of their own kind had failed. The king's booming voice rose above the noise. "So be it. Human, you have asked for the fiercest of my daughters. She herself has demanded you face the trials. If you succeed, you may have what you desire. But if you fail," his eyes burned like molten fire, "you will leave this world in shame." Daniel bowed his head slightly, his voice steady. "Then I accept." Sarath studied him for a moment longer. She had expected fear, hesitation, or even an excuse to escape. But the human stood tall, his eyes unbroken. For the first time, doubt flickered inside her. Was he truly foolish, or was he something else entirely? The king rose from his throne, his voice echoing like thunder. "The trials will begin at dawn. Until then, let the human rest. He will need his strength." As the guards led Daniel out of the hall, Sarath remained behind, her thoughts unsettled. She had faced countless warriors, broken their pride, and sent them crawling away. But this human had not wavered. And somewhere deep inside, though she would never admit it, she wondered what dawn would bring. The dawn came slowly, painting the alien sky in deep shades of blue and silver. The twin suns rose above the horizon, their light falling on the grand palace that stood tall like a fortress carved from mountains. The city around it was alive, its people already awake, eager to witness the strange event that had been promised. The human soldier facing the trials of their fiercest princess. Daniel woke in a chamber prepared for him, though it was not decorated with softness or luxury. The walls were made of stone and torches burned with steady flames. A single bed and a basin of water stood at the side. He had not slept much. His thoughts were heavy, and the echo of Sarath's laughter from the hall still lingered in his ears. He had chosen his path. He had rejected riches and comfort, asking instead for the daughter of the king, the fiercest warrior among her people. Many would call it madness, but Daniel's heart was certain. Riches were temporary. Power was fragile, but someone who carried strength in her soul, that was eternal. When the guards came for him, he stood tall and followed without fear. The corridors of the palace were lined with banners of war, each showing victories of the alien kingdom. The guards looked at him with cold eyes, some with pity, others with amusement. They did not believe he would last the day. Outside, the training ground stretched like a wide arena. Hundreds of alien citizens had gathered, their voices rising in excitement. At the center stood Serath, her armor gleaming under the twin suns. Her long braids swung behind her as she sharpened her blade against a stone, her expression unreadable. When Daniel stepped into the arena, silence spread through the crowd. Everyone waited for Serath to speak. She lifted her head, her eyes locking onto him like fire-piercing steel. "You stand here because you dared to ask for what others fear," she said, her voice sharp and strong. "But I am not a prize human. I am not a jewel in a king's crown or a gift for a hero. If you want to stand beside me, you will prove yourself by surviving the trials of my people." Daniel nodded calmly. "Then I will face them." Her lips curved into a cold smile. She turned to the king, who watched from his high seat above the arena. "Father, let the trials begin." The first challenge was announced. The fire fields. The guards led Daniel to a stretch of land outside the city, where the ground was cracked and glowing with heat. The fire fields were a natural scar of the planet, where flames burst from the earth without warning and the air burned like a furnace. Warriors of Serath's people trained here to test their endurance, but many had been carried out with scars. The crowd followed, standing at the edges, cheering for the trial to begin. Serath crossed her arms and watched, her expression as hard as stone. Daniel stepped to the edge of the field. The heat was already pressing against his skin, but he did not flinch. He knew this was more than just a trial of body. It was a test of spirit. When the signal was given, he walked into the fields. The ground cracked under his boots, flames shooting up around him. Sweat poured down his face and the air burned in his chest. Every step was heavy, but he did not stop. Serath watched closely, expecting him to falter, but he kept moving, steady and determined. When a burst of fire erupted in front of him, he shielded his face with his arm and pushed forward. When the heat made his vision blur, he focused on one step at a time. Minutes turned into an hour, and still he walked. The crowd began to whisper, in disbelief. Even some of their strongest warriors had collapsed before reaching the center. Yet the human pressed onward, his jaw set, his eyes sharp with resolve. When he finally emerged on the far side, his clothes were scorched, and his body trembled with exhaustion, but he was still standing. The crowd erupted in shouts, some in admiration, others in anger that a human had endured what many of their kind had failed. Serath narrowed her eyes. She had expected him to collapse, yet he had survived. Still, she was not convinced. The crystal spires. The second trial awaited. A formation of towering crystal spires stretched high into the clouds. Their surfaces were sharp and slippery, their points dangerous. Storms often rolled across them, striking with bolts of lightning. The task was simple: climb to the top of the highest spire and return. When Daniel looked up, the climb seemed endless. But he did not hesitate. He began his ascent, gripping the sharp surfaces with bleeding hands. The wind roared, threatening to hurl him down, but he pressed onward. Halfway up, a storm gathered. Lightning cracked, shaking the spires. The crowd gasped as Daniel clung tightly, his body nearly thrown from the rock. Serath leaned forward, her heart tightening despite herself. She wanted him to fall, to prove her doubts right. But another part of her wanted to see if he would endure. Daniel remembered every battle he had fought, every desperate moment when giving up would have meant death. He forced himself higher, ignoring the blood that dripped from his palms. At last, he reached the top. The storm lit the sky, and for a moment his figure stood against the lightning like a shadow of iron. Then he began the descent, careful but steady. When he reached the ground, the crowd roared again. Serath's lips tightened. The human was stubborn, but stubbornness was not enough. The beast of shadows, the final trial, was the most dangerous. A cage stood at the far end of the arena, its bars thick and reinforced. Inside, a beast roared, its body massive, its eyes glowing red. It had defeated many warriors in the past, leaving them broken or fleeing. The gate opened, and the beast charged into the arena. The ground shook under its weight, its claws tearing through stone. Daniel stood ready, but he did not raise his weapon recklessly. He studied the beast, watching its movements. The crowd screamed in excitement as the creature lunged. Daniel rolled aside, barely escaping its claws. He picked up a broken spear from the ground, holding it firmly. Again the beast attacked, and again he dodged. He was not trying to overpower it. He was trying to outthink it. Minutes passed, and Daniel used every tactic he knew. He made the beast strike stone walls, tiring it. He lured it into traps of its own strength. Finally, when it stumbled, he drove the broken spear into its leg, forcing it to collapse. The beast roared, but it could no longer stand. The arena fell silent. Daniel did not kill it. Instead, he stepped back, lowering the weapon. The crowd gasped in shock. Sarath stared, her heart pounding. He had defeated the beast not with brute force but with cunning, and he had spared its life. The king rose from his seat, his voice echoing. The trials are complete. The human has survived where many have failed. The crowd shouted, some in anger, others in awe. Sarath, however, stepped forward, her eyes locked on Daniel. She was not ready to yield. She walked into the arena, her blade gleaming in the sun. "You have faced the trials," she said coldly, "but I am not convinced. If you want me, then face me." The crowd roared louder than ever. The fiercest daughter herself would now fight the human. Daniel tightened, his grip on the spear, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. He nodded once. Then so be it. The arena buzzed like a storm waiting to break. The trials had been survived, and the human had walked out of fire, climbed the deadly spires, and even bested the beast. Yet Sarath, the fiercest daughter of the alien king, was not ready to be won over by mere endurance. She stepped into the center, her blade flashing as she unsheathed it. The steel shimmered under the twin suns, catching every eye in the crowd. Daniel stood opposite her, holding only the broken spear he had used against the beast. His body was tired, bruises covered his arms, and blood still stained his palms. But his eyes held no fear. He straightened, refusing to bend under her glare. The crowd cheered, stomping their feet against the stone, eager for blood. Some shouted Sarath's name, convinced she would crush the human in moments. Others whispered, wondering if the impossible would continue. Could he truly face her and survive? Sarath pointed her blade at him. "You have survived trials meant for warriors, but do not think that earns my respect. If you want me, then prove it with steel." Daniel nodded slowly. "I did not come here to take you by force. I came to stand beside you. But if this is the way to prove myself, then I accept." Her lips curved into a cold smile. "Good. Let us see if your words mean anything when faced with me." The king raised his hand, his deep voice carrying across the arena. "Begin." The first clash, Sarath moved first, fast as lightning. Her blade sliced through the air, aiming for Daniel's chest. He barely dodged, rolling aside as sparks flew from where her sword struck stone. The sound of the impact echoed, making the crowd roar. Daniel tightened his grip on the broken spear and circled her, watching carefully. She was faster, stronger, and better armed. He could not win by matching her strength. He had to outthink her as he had done with the beast. She pressed forward again, her strikes precise and merciless. Daniel blocked with the spear's shaft, each blow rattling his arms. He felt the weapon cracking under the force. Still, he held on, stepping back, defending but not retreating in spirit. "Is this all?" Sarath mocked, her eyes sharp with fire. "You fight like prey trying to escape." Daniel steadied his breathing. "And yet I am still standing." The words seemed to spark her anger further. She lunged, her sword cutting the spear in half. The broken weapon fell from his hands. The crowd gasped, certain it was over. But Daniel did not panic. He bent quickly, grabbing the jagged end, holding it like a dagger. His eyes never left hers. "I don't need a perfect weapon. I only need my will." For the first time, Sarath hesitated. His determination was unshaken. even. When stripped of advantage, the dance of blades, the duel turned into a dance. Sarath struck again and again, her blade flashing with deadly skill. Daniel dodged, blocked with the broken spear, and moved with surprising speed for someone so exhausted. His training as a soldier was different from her people's style, but it gave him a strange rhythm she had not seen before. The crowd shouted with every clash. Sparks flew as steel met stone, as Sarath's strength met Daniel's resilience. Sweat poured down his face, but he did not falter. Every time she thought he would collapse, he found another step, another move to stay in the fight. Her anger slowly shifted into something else. Curiosity. She had faced countless warriors, all of them stronger and faster than this human, yet most had fallen quickly. But he refused to fall. His body was weaker, but his spirit burned like fire. At one moment, Sarath swung her blade in a wide arc, forcing him to dive and roll across the ground. He came up with dust clinging to his skin, his chest heaving. She lifted her sword again but paused, noticing the look in his eyes. It was not fear. It was respect. He was not fighting to win her like property. He was fighting to prove himself, worthy to stand beside her. Testing hearts. You fight with no chance to win, Sarath said, her voice lower, almost questioning. Why? Daniel steadied himself, gripping the broken weapon tighter. Because strength is not only in the body, it's in the will. I fight not to conquer you, but to show you I will not break, no matter how fierce you are. Her chest tightened at his words. She had heard many claim strength, but most were driven by pride or desire. This human spoke differently. His tone carried no arrogance, only certainty. The crowd grew restless, demanding action. Sarath's eyes narrowed again, shaking, off the feeling. Then prove it. She attacked with renewed force, striking harder and faster. Daniel blocked, dodged, and even countered with clever thrusts of his broken spear. He managed to cut her arm lightly, the first time anyone had marked her in combat for years. Gasps filled the air. Sarath looked at the cut, then at him. Instead of anger, she felt a strange thrill. For the first time, someone had met her head-on and not collapsed under her might. The turning point. The fight dragged on. Daniel's strength began to fade, his movements slower, but his eyes remained unbroken. Sarath pressed him until he stumbled, falling to one knee. Her sword pointed at his throat, the crowd roaring in anticipation of the end. She stared down at him, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. His body was broken, but his spirit shone brighter than ever. He looked up at her, his voice calm despite the blade at his neck. If you strike me down, it will not change who I am. I came here with respect, not greed. I did not ask for you, because I wanted a prize. I asked because I saw your fire and I want to walk beside it, not above it. Her hand trembled slightly on the sword. Around them, the crowd shouted for her to finish it. But in that moment, she saw the truth in his eyes. He was not lying. He was not afraid. He was ready to die with his honor unbroken. Slowly, Sarath lowered her blade. The arena gasped in disbelief. She stepped back, her voice loud enough for all to hear. He has proven his will. He does not fight like prey. He fights like one who seeks honor. I will not strike him down. The crowd erupted, divided between outrage and admiration. The king watched silently, his expression unreadable. A new flame Sarath turned to her father. He has survived the trials. He has faced me and stood unbroken. I do not accept him as a prize, but I recognize his strength. Daniel rose slowly, every muscle aching, but relief washing through him. He bowed his head slightly toward her, respect shining in his eyes. The king finally stood, his booming voice silencing the arena. The human has shown courage beyond measure. He has faced trials that few of our kind could endure, and he has earned the respect of my daughter. This is no small thing. The people shouted again, their voices filling the sky. Some still doubted, but many could not deny what they had seen. Sarath looked at Daniel, her expression softer than before. Do not think this means I have accepted you, she said firmly. You may have proven yourself today, but respect must be built, not claimed in a single battle. Daniel nodded, his lips curving into the faintest of smiles. Then let me keep proving it day by day. For the first time, Serath felt something stir inside her, a spark she could not name. Perhaps she thought this human was more than she had believed. And as the sun set behind the arena, casting long shadows across the land, a new bond began to form, not of conquest, but of mutual respect. The fiercest daughter had not been claimed. She had chosen not to strike, and in that choice, the path to something greater had begun. The duel had ended, but the echoes of steel and the roar of the crowd still lingered in Daniel's mind. His body was battered and aching, yet his spirit stood tall. He had not won against Serath, not in the way others might define victory. But he had not been broken either. He had faced her blade, her strength, and her fire, and he had endured. That night, the city was alive with noise. Taverns filled with citizens talking about the strange human who had passed the trials. Some laughed and dismissed it as luck. Others whispered that perhaps the human carried something deeper, something even their strongest warriors could not match. Inside the palace, however, silence reigned. Daniel was given rest in a chamber, his wounds treated with alien medicine that burned like fire, but healed swiftly. He lay on the bed, staring at the stone ceiling, replaying every strike of the duel in his mind. He knew he had only survived because he had refused to surrender. That was all he had, his unyielding will. Across the palace, Serath stood on a balcony, her blade resting against the railing. She gazed at the twin moons that hung above the horizon. She had fought countless warriors before, and most had fallen, quickly. None had impressed her. None had lasted long enough for her to even remember their names. But the human, Daniel, was different. He had no great weapon, no unmatched strength, yet he had refused to yield even when he stood at the edge of defeat in his words. Those words lingered. I did not ask for you because I wanted a prize. I asked because I saw your fire. She clenched her fists, frustrated with herself. Why did those words echo in her heart? Morning tests at dawn, Serath did not allow Daniel to rest further. She found him outside the healing chamber, still stiff with pain but awake. You survived the trials, she said, her voice sharp, and you faced me without breaking. But do not think that makes you worthy of me. Respect is not won in a single day. Daniel nodded, his expression calm. I understand. Then let me earn it. She studied him carefully, as if trying to catch a crack in his resolve. But his eyes were steady. She turned away. Then follow me. She led him out of the palace and into the wild lands that stretched beyond the city. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks hidden by clouds. Forests of black stone trees twisted under. The suns and rivers of silver water cut through the valleys. Here was where her people trained, not for sport, but for survival. The trials tested your endurance, she said as they walked. But endurance alone is not enough. If you truly wish to stand beside me, then I must know you are not weak in heart or spirit. She handed him a short blade, nothing more. Today you will walk with me. We will face what the wild throws at us. If you falter, if you hesitate, then I will know you are nothing but words. Daniel gripped the blade, nodding. Then lead the way. The hunt. Their first challenge came quickly. In the shadow of the stone trees, creatures stirred, large, wolf-like beasts with dark hides and glowing eyes. They circled, their growls rumbling like thunder. Serath drew her long blade, her eyes sharp. She struck first, moving like lightning, cutting one beast down before it could leap. Daniel stood, his ground waiting as another charged him. Instead of striking wildly, he crouched low, letting the beast's weight carry it forward, and drove the blade into its side. The creature fell, howling. Serath glanced at him, surprised. His movements were not perfect, not polished, but they were clever. He fought with instinct and with thought, not just brute strength. They fought side by side until the beasts retreated into the forest, leaving silence behind. Daniel was breathing hard, but he stood firm. Sarath wiped her blade clean, her expression unreadable. Not bad, for a human. Daniel smirked faintly. I'll take that as praise. The river crossing by midday, they reached a river of rushing, silver water. The current was strong, and sharp rocks broke the surface like jagged teeth. Sarath crossed swiftly, leaping from stone to stone with the grace of one who had done it many times. Daniel followed. The rocks were slippery, and the current pulled hard against his legs. Twice he nearly slipped, but each time he steadied himself and kept moving. When he finally reached the far side, soaked and gasping, Sarath was waiting with her arms crossed. "You are slow," she said. "But I crossed," Daniel replied, smiling despite his exhaustion. For the first time, Sarath's lips twitched as if she wanted to smile, but she quickly turned away. The cliff as the suns began to sink. They reached a cliffside where the wind howled like a beast. At the top was a nest of sky serpents, creatures with wings of fire and scales like blades. Sarath climbed swiftly, her hands gripping the stone with ease. Daniel followed, his muscles screaming in protest, his wounds from the duel still aching. Halfway up, a stone broke under his hand, sending him dangling over the drop. The crowd of warriors below gasped. Sarath looked down, her heart tightening. For a moment she expected him to fall, but Daniel's other hand gripped hard, and with a grunt of effort, he pulled himself back onto the cliff. He continued climbing, never once calling for help. When he reached the top, Sarath was waiting. The sky serpents circled above, their screeches filling the air. Together they fought them, blades flashing against wings and claws. Daniel moved with quick strikes, targeting weak points, while Sarath struck with raw power. Their movements began to flow together, her strength covering his weakness, his cunning covering her blind spots. When the last serpent fell, the two of them stood side by side, breathing hard, staring at the horizon. For the first time, Sarath felt something she had never felt in battle before: partnership. The quiet moment as night fell, they camped by a small fire near the cliff's edge. The stars stretched above them, endless and bright. Daniel sat quietly, sharpening his blade while Sarath gazed into the fire. Finally she spoke, her voice softer than usual. "You are different from the others who have tried. They came for pride or glory or to prove themselves better. You..." She hesitated. "You fight not to take, but to stand." Daniel looked at her across the fire. "Because I meant what?" I said. "I don't want to own you. I want to walk beside you. You are fierce, unbroken. That's something worth more than all the treasures your father could offer." Her chest tightened again, though she tried to hide it. She had never met someone who spoke to her like this. Most feared her or tried to tame her. This human did neither. He simply stood with respect. For a long time they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. The decision. By the time they returned to the palace, the stars had begun to fade with dawn. The king was waiting in his hall, his expression unreadable, as he looked upon them. "Well?" he asked his daughter. "Has the human proven himself to you?" Sarath stood tall, her blade still stained with the blood of beasts and serpents. She looked at Daniel, then at her father. For the first time, her voice did not carry the sharp edge of defiance, but something steadier. "He has proven that he is not weak," she said. "He has proven that he will not break. He does not seek me as a prize, but as an equal. And for that, I choose to walk beside him, not because he asked, not because you commanded, but because I see his worth." The hall erupted in murmurs. Some nobles gasped in outrage, others in awe. The king's eyes widened slightly, then softened. Slowly he rose from his throne, his deep voice echoing. "Then so be it. My fiercest daughter has made her choice. Let it be known. The human has not taken her, but earned her respect." Daniel bowed his head, his heart steady. Sarath glanced at him, her eyes softer than they had ever been. For the first time in her life, the fiercest daughter of the alien king had made her own decision, and it was for him. The throne hall was filled with noise as the alien nobles argued among themselves. Some shouted that it was shameful for a human to be honored in such a way, while others admitted that Daniel had proven strength unlike anything they had seen before. Their voices echoed through the stone pillars until the king raised his hand. Silence fell at once. The alien king's deep voice carried across the hall. Enough. My daughter has spoken. Her choice is her own. This human has survived the trials, faced her blade, and walked beside her in the wilds. He has done what few among us could. Whether you like it or not, his place here is earned. The nobles bowed reluctantly, though their eyes still burned with suspicion. Daniel stood at the center, his back straight, his face calm. He did not celebrate or boast. He simply bowed his head slightly, honoring the king's words. Beside him, Sarath stood tall, her armor gleaming under the torchlight. Her expression was firm, yet there was a new calmness in her eyes. For the first time, she was not standing alone, a feast of tension. That evening, the palace prepared a grand feast. Long tables filled the hall with food from across the kingdom, roasted beasts, fruits shining like gems, and golden drinks that shimmered in their cups. The nobles gathered, speaking in hushed voices as Daniel entered with Sarath. Though the music played and laughter echoed, Daniel could feel the tension like a blade against his neck. Many eyes followed him, watching every move, waiting for him to falter. Yet he kept his composure, greeting those who dared to speak to him, and listening more than he talked. Sarath sat beside him, her presence like a shield. Whenever a noble tried to sneer or mock, her sharp gaze silenced them. She had never defended anyone before, but tonight she did not hesitate. At one point, a bold noble stood, raising his cup. We honor the human who thinks himself worthy of our fiercest daughter. But tell us, will he still stand proud when real war comes again? Or will he hide behind her blade? The hall grew quiet. All eyes turned to Daniel. He rose slowly, holding his cup in one hand. His voice was steady, carrying across the tables. I did not come here to hide behind anyone. I came to fight beside her. If war comes again, I will stand on the front lines. And if I fall, then I will fall with honor, the nobles murmured, surprised by the certainty in his voice. The king himself gave a slow nod of approval. Sarath glanced at Daniel, her heart stirring again at his words. Seeds of change in the days that followed, Daniel began to walk among the people of the alien kingdom. At first they avoided him, seeing only a fragile human among giants. But as they watched him train with their warriors, face their beasts, and endure without complaint, their opinions slowly shifted. Children followed him through the streets, curious about the strange man from another world. He would kneel and speak to them in simple words, telling stories of Earth, of the seas and forests they had never seen. The laughter of children began to soften the hearts of their parents. Sarath, too, watched closely. She saw how Daniel did not act like someone seeking power. He did not demand respect. He simply lived with quiet strength, proving himself each day with actions rather than words. One morning, as they sparred in the training grounds, Sarath finally spoke what had been weighing on her heart. When you first asked for me, I thought you were foolish. I thought you saw me as a prize, but now I see you saw something else. Daniel lowered his practice blade, his chest rising with deep breaths. I saw someone who could never be broken, and I wanted to walk beside that fire. Her lips curved into a rare smile. Then perhaps you are not so foolish after all. The shadow of threat, but peace never lasted long. News reached the palace of raiders from beyond the stars. Enemies who had once been allies of the alien kingdom now turned to plunder and destruction. Their ships had crossed into the outer territories, leaving villages burned and people taken. King gathered his generals, and Sarath stood among them. Daniel was there too, though some sneered at his presence. The king's voice thundered as he ordered preparations for war. Father, Sarath spoke firmly, let me lead a strike against them. If we wait, more of our people will suffer. Daniel stepped forward. I will go with her. The hall erupted in protest. A human? The generals shouted. "He will slow her down." The king silenced them with a wave of his hand. His eyes studied Daniel carefully. At last he nodded. "Very well. Let the human go. Let him prove his words on the battlefield." The battle their ships cut across the stars, sleek and fast, until they reached the raiders' fleet. Fire lit the void as the battle began. Serath led with fearless strikes, her blade cutting through armored foes. Daniel fought at her side not with unmatched strength but with sharp tactics. He used the enemy's numbers against them, turning traps and distractions into victories. At one point, Serath was surrounded, her blade clashing against multiple foes. Daniel threw himself into the fray, shielding her back. Together they fought, as one, her power and his cunning, her fire and his resolve. The raiders, unprepared for such unity, began to falter. Their ships fell back, their warriors defeated. The battle ended with victory, and the people cheered across the stars, the choice of hearts. When they returned to the palace, the people greeted them not as strangers, but as champions. Children ran beside Daniel, shouting his name. Nobles bowed. To Serath and Daniel both, their resistance slowly crumbling. That night the king summoned them before the court. His deep voice carried pride. "You have fought together and returned victorious. My daughter, you have chosen well, and human." He paused, then nodded firmly. "You have proven you belong here." Serath stepped forward. She did not wait for her father's command. Her voice rang clear for all to hear. "I have chosen him, not as a gift, not as a prize, but as my equal. From this day forward, I walk beside him." The hall shook with voices, some in shock, others in celebration. Daniel bowed his head, humbled by her words. Legacy years later, songs were sung of the human who refused riches and asked instead for the fiercest daughter of an alien king. They spoke of how he endured fire, storms, beasts, and even her blade. They told of how he stood not to conquer her but to walk beside her, and how together they brought strength and peace to two worlds. Daniel and Serath became a legend, not of wealth or power, but of honor, respect, and unity. Where once humans and aliens had mistrusted each other, now they looked upon the pair and saw what was possible when courage met fire. And so the story spread across the stars. The tale of the human who rejected treasures and instead asked for something far greater. Not gold, not land, but the bond of a warrior whose spirit burned brighter than any jewel. The fiercest daughter had chosen. And together, she and the human built a legacy that time could never erase.